The following program is a production of Tim Jackson, who assumes full responsibility for its content. The content of this program does not represent the views of FCTV, which serves as a forum for community expression and offers TV training, production facilities, and channel time to all Falmouth residents and organizations. Welcome to another episode of West Falmouth History and Heritage. Tonight we will expand our scope and consider the role that Cape Cod and the islands played in the development of amphibious theories, vehicles, tactics, and equipment, all of which were tested and developed right here in your backyard.
Good evening to everyone. I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the Joe Q organization before we get started. And I am a 30-year Army veteran, and most of the people that are in the Joe Q organization right now are veterans, and that's what our program is really all about. We took the Joe Q name because of the man that originally started the program. And he was a U.S. Coast Guard diver. Well, Joe passed away a few years ago, and he was very intent on having a place for veterans to have their own space. And so we, in the interim, we've taken his name and, with his family's consent, we tried to and have succeeded in getting the Old Senior Center as part of the place that veterans will be able to go and find services if they need them. So that's what the Joe Q organization is all about. Our mission statement says that we provide fellowship and the building of trust for veterans, family members, and friends for a healthy and productive life. Veterans are close to my heart. My dad was a veteran, my brother is a veteran, and now I'm a veteran. So we come from a long line of people who have been in the military. Tonight the program that we have is called the Cradle of Invasion for America in World War II. Am I correct, Joe? And Joe Yepner is the co-founder of the Cape Cod Military Museum that's located in Bourne. The museum was founded in 1997. Now Joe has been doing...
The land isn't, we don't have a building yet, we have land.
So you're like us.
So we're a fledgling museum, yeah.
Okay, so you're like us.
Well, we started in 97, and we had 2 barracks and 10 acres on Camp Edwards, ready to go. A little thing called 9/11 happened, and then knocked us back. So you can't have a museum and nobody can get to it because the base used to be open for a while, you could drive through it, and then they closed it down. So we're rebounding finally now, getting things going. So
you've made this presentation throughout Cape Cod, I would assume. And I think with you have a military, your family is also has a long history of involvement in the military. Your father served in World War II or World War I?
No, World War II and Korea.
And Korea, sorry. And you have 2 sons that...
One son.
They
I have two
have
sons.
one that was in the military that served in...
The war in terror.
in Kuwait, correct?
Kuwait and Iraq.
Okay.
Kuwait and Iraq.
And you worked on Otis.
I was Department of Defense police officer.
I thought I recognized you. So your passion is to educate members about what took place on Cape Cod during the Second World War. And with no further introduction, Joe Yepner.
Thank you very much. Well, not only the Second World War, military history in general, but obviously World War II was the biggest show going for quite a while. Yeah, my dad was in the Navy Air Corps in World War II and on a destroyer in the Korean War. He loved the Korean War because he was in the Atlantic, which is a good place to be. His son was on the veteran of the War on Terror, and I worked out at Camp Edwards. And I was driving around and seeing all these buildings that were, 2,000 buildings built for World War II, dilapidated at that time. But I was going, what on earth happened here? So that led to the interest in the military history of the Cape Cod. And this talk is near and dear to my heart because it tells a fascinating story, which a lot of people don't know about. And that is the Cape Cod was the cradle of invasion for World War II. And put them across is the slogan for the 2nd ESB, Engineer Special Brigade. And those were the men who were known as Cape Cod Commandos. Well, our story doesn't start here. It starts with a British nobleman by the name of Lewis. No, not Prince Louis. Not King Louis. There he is. Lord Louis Mountbatten. Mountbatten was a military genius. They came up with the combined arms forces concept, which enabled the most difficult thing in military operations, which is a landing on a hostile shore, amphibious landing on a hostile shore. In fact, this is his design of the patch. And the eagle represents the Air Force part of it, the Tommy gun represents the Army, and the anchor is the Navy. You had to have one command coordinating all three of those branches because otherwise it would be chaos. If anybody you have been in any military operations, it's chaos anyways, but if you had different command structures, it wouldn't work at all. He had his commandos giving the Axis forces fits with the hit-and-run raids years before America entered the war. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, the U.S. realized that there would have to be troops trained in the most difficult operation, like I said before, amphibious assaults. In 1942, Mountbatten, Sir John Dill, and U.S. generals decided that our troops should receive initial training for amphibious operations here in the United States. And they wanted a site that would host a division, was near the shore, and an excellent rail service, and year-round amphibious training. Well, Camp Edwards didn't have the year-round thing because of the winters, but it had the other two. It could fit a division, it had excellent rail service, and it was near the shore. So while they were building a camp down in Carabella, Florida, Camp Gordon Johnson, Camp Edwards would fit the bill. Now, the Amphibious Training Command and the Engineer Amphibious Command were both on Cape Cod. The Amphibious Training Command trained regular troops how to conduct an amphibious assault. So the division would come in and they'd train their troops how to get out of a landing craft and all that stuff. When they got here, they had one sergeant, one folding desk, and one building to start off their ambitious job of training divisions. The Amphibious Engineer Command, they're the ones who train the guys to drive the boats, clear the beaches, and be the amphibious engineer. So the two different commands on the Cape. And their symbol is the seahorse. When Colonel Lachie came up, he and his staff used to work 18 hours a day in the summer of June 42, getting the Cape ready to become the cradle of invasion. Cape Cod, however, was not a complete stranger to amphibious operations. In 1941, prior to the U.S. entry into World War II, the 1st Infantry Division, actually the 16th Infantry Regiment of the Big Red One, trained in amphibious operations in Buzzards Bay. They took trucks from, they were at Fort Devens, to Boston, where they boarded the USS Kent, which was an amphibious assault craft or ship, and they loaded into their boats. There they are going down the cargo nets into the LCPs, which is the very first landing craft. and they hit the beaches. Does anybody recognize that beach? Old Silver. The date that picture was taken was June 6th, 1941. June 6, 1944, the very same people, the very same men were hitting the shore of Normandy. Okay? That's some of the connections that we have to history right here in Cape Cod. Well, the question then becomes, where do you get men to be the engineer amphibian? You could train landlubbers in the ways of the sea, but it'd be a lot easier to get people who had some experience in the ways of the sea. So the Army went through the Coast Guard, the Navy, the Merchant Marines, and of course the Army, and looked for guys who had small boat experience. And they were taken, direct commissions were given to yacht club members that could navigate. If you could navigate, you were an officer. Navigation's hard to teach, and they didn't have time. They detoured a lot of the recruits for the amphibious corps to factories where the boats were being constructed. And they'd spend a couple of weeks on the assembly line, watching how the boats were built and all that to give them experience. They didn't go very far. These LCMs, landing craft mechanized or material, were being built at the Boston shipyard. They were put on railroad cars and shipped down to Camp Edwards. Right? We had that railroad bridge. It was used a lot back in the day. Our great ally, Britain, provided experts to help train our boys in the commando tactics. Each engineer special brigade was to have 7,000 officers and men and 550 boats. And this is seacoast shores. You know how straight seacoast shores and all the roads go perfectly straight across? Because they were made by the military. And those dots aren't cottages. Those are 5-man pyramid tents. They had 18,000 troops in tents on the south coast of Cape Cod in World War II. And that's the wooden bridge you can see up there connecting Washburn Island. Here's another picture of Quoit Bay, and you can see the huge docks they had to tie up the boats and fuel the boats. And that's the channel by South Cape Beach, Mashpee on the right, and Washburn Island on the left. You can see the landing craft coming in. The bigger docks on the bottom, those are landing craft tank. They could hold 5 Sherman tanks. And there's one beach. You can see all the equipment and stuff coming off the boat. But that's Quoit Bay in World War II. Again, here's a picture of the tents on Washburn Island. Here's a picture of the one of the docks. You can see there's all different types. There's the small ramp ones, the LCPR, the LCVP, the famous Higgins boats, and there's even, way in the background, there's an LCP which didn't have a ramp at all. But all different types were used, and that's Washburn Island. And you see the street lights on there. A lot of the operations were done at night. So you have to load up the men and fuel up the boats. And so the docks were lit. Here's another picture looking at Mashpee from the island. Here's another picture of the docks. You can see all the lights. The piers are over 700 feet long. Piers 3 and 4 were mooring piers, and they were both over 800 feet long. The fueling piers were the 700 footers. Here's a map. You can see the docks are in brown. Originally, Washburn was reached by a pontoon bridge at the end of Seapit Road. And this was another picture of the pontoon bridge. Replaced by that wooden bridge we showed you in the earlier picture. Camp Can Do It was in Katuitt. And here's a map. You can see the different docks they had. They had a 900-foot dock. Okay, and those some of the housing that they barracks and stuff they built for the training, because there was another 550 boats in Katuitt. And they would fire mortars from Point Isabella. And they also did land on Dead Neck, which is in Sampson's Island. If you've ever been to Katuitt, that's not very wide, but that was the impact area was right there. You had people living right there. Okay, they were in a hurry. And last, we had Camp Had Done It, which was in Osterville. And this is where they did all the heavy boat repair. I just got this picture added to this. It's not very good quality because it's kind of a newspaper. There's a camp. We just got a bunch of copies of the Camp Edwards News that was printed. But I hadn't had a picture of Camp Had Done It. And that's Great Island where the golf course and stuff is now. We've been out to Osterville. There's another picture of it. They took over the Crosby boatyard. They said, we can either take it by eminent domain or lease it from you. If we lease it from you, you'll have some control over what we do. And so the Crosby boatyard said, we'll lease it. Everyone go golfing at New Seabury? That's the Pomp. This is the Oceanside course. It was their anti-aircraft training range. 50 caliber guns going off. Because they had to have their own anti-aircraft. Everything had to be integrated in the amphibious corps. You had to have your own engineers to clear the beaches. You had to have your own medical evacuation. You had to have your own anti-tank unit. You had to have your own, air control. You had to have your own anti-aircraft. Everything had to be integrated into that unit. Had to be, because otherwise you couldn't coordinate it. They used to fire drones. Drones were top secret at the time. Because before they used drones, they had pilots fly a plane dragging a target while guys were learning how to shoot their guns. Okay? Now, they didn't use military pilots because they were too valuable. There's an organization called the Civil Air Patrol. And CAP Base 18 was at the Coonamessett Airport, which is Crane Reservation. You know where the old Nickelodeon Theater is? That was a grass field, and that's where they flew out of. And they did anti-submarine patrols because there weren't enough planes and pilots to actually do the patrol of the coast because we got cut a little flat-footed.
How many got shot down?
Well, there's crashed drones everywhere, but they haven't heard about anybody getting shot by them.
Well, that'll be kept secret anyway.
Yeah, they wouldn't advertise that. But you know what? I think that's the planes that pull the banners.
Yeah.
I think that's where they got the idea from, because they basically were pulling a banner that had copper wire in it, which the radar would pick up the copper wire in it. So that's probably where that whole thing came from. Was that? And these are the tents at camp in Katuitt. The first Engineer Special Brigade started off here in August of '42, but they were called overseas very quickly. They basically cleared the land on Washburn and had a little bit of training. Luckily, they had more training in England before landing in North Africa. The first ESB also landed in Sicily, Italy, Normandy. That's them. You see the helmet with the white crescent and the patch, the blue patch. That's how you can identify amphibious corps. They landed a half hour before the regular troops on D-Day. They had a 33% casualty rate. This is a monument the French built for the guys that started out training right here in Cape Cod. It's the second ESB that the people refer to as the Cape Cod Commandos. They came and they cleared the land around Katuitt and Camp Kanduit. Although they were called Cape Cod Commandos after the British newsreels where they showed commandos doing all kinds of crazy things, the engineers were quick to point out that commandos hit and run. We hit, but we don't run. The 2nd ESB Special Brigade liked the nickname Cape Cod Commandos and kept it. They could still be heard to call out to each other, "Buck up, you Cape Cod Commando. We're landing on some Pacific island clear across the world." When this patch was made and manufactured for the new unit, 342 women and girls from Falmouth boarded trucks and jeeps to go over to Washburn Island and hand sew on the patches. They spent 2,309 hours sewing on 20,000 patches. The commandos had to learn boat navigation and handling all weather conditions. Here's a photo of an LCM that broached, turned sideways to the surf, and this is their nightmare. Once your back end gets swung around like that, your boat's going to be battered to pieces. Much of the training occurred at night. As you can see the flash illuminating the boats going out. The reason it's done at night is most assault landings were done at dawn. So you had to assemble in the dark. So you hit the beach right at dawn, so you had a full day of daylight to fight and see what's going on. That's why they did most of their training in the dark. Training is dangerous. Here's a newspaper clipping about when the guide boat lost its engine and sank, not sank, but capsized. The amphibious, besides the famous Higgins boats, they had a command boat. And the command boat had waterproof compartments, so the boat that capsized and those guys drowned didn't sink, but it didn't have a self-righting keel. You remember the rescue of the Pendleton? That little 36-foot boat had what's called a self-righting keel. It was weighted, so even if a wave spun it over, it would right itself and come up upright. This boat didn't have that capability. When they towed it back into Vineyard Haven, they found one of the crewmen had gone down to the engine compartment to try to restart the engine. He was still inside the boat when they brought it back in, upside down. They called it a picket or command vessel. This is the first landing craft. It's called an LCP, landing craft personnel, and if you can tell by the bow, there's no ramp. And that's when we showed it, Old Silver, the guys jumping over the sides. You had to jump off it to get out there. Now, Mr. Higgins was making these boats prior to World War II. Anybody have a guess who he was selling them to? Rum runners. You slip on the beach, dump your booze, and then back out. So that's where that design came from. The next step up was the LCP. This is the LCPR. You can see the small ramp at the front. So now the guys could walk off directly. But it still was a small ramp. Only one or two guys could go off at a time. The next step up is the famous LCVP, which is landing craft vehicle personnel. And you can see how the hull does that dip. That's so the propeller and stuff could stay in the water as it beached. And then, of course, when the weight came off, it would pop up and it could back out. Here, this is Martha's Vineyard. Here's a Jeep being offloaded onto Martha's Vineyard. That's why it could carry a small vehicle, a Jeep and a trailer, or 36 men.
Excuse me, another question?
Sure.
Were there any German U-boat sightings during all this activity?
Well, this is the summer of 42. In the summer of 43, one guy flying an Otis sank 2 of them in one day. Yeah, we had U-boats. It's another topic I haven't got to yet, but yeah. In fact, a boat got stuck in a canal, and they had a dynamite in place to get it out of there. For 2 weeks, boats had to go around the canal to get through to Boston. 5 ships were torpedoed during that 2-week period because they had to go around, not use the canal. Because why was it safe to use the canal? Buzzards Bay and Cape Cod Bay were blocked off by anti-submarine nets. There was steel netting running from Plymouth to Peaktown. Think how much steel that is. I think they can build a little one for sharks up in Nauset, don't you? But sorry if I digress. This is the LCM. It can carry 1 Sherman tank. That's 30-ton vehicle. And this is the LC Teague landing craft tank, and they can carry 5 Shermans. It's 95 feet long. Anything over 100 feet, the Navy took control of. So this was the last Army boat. Odd fact, the Army had more boats than the Navy did in World War II because of all the landing craft. Amphibious vehicles were also tested and developed here. That's Provincetown. I don't think they let you drive like that in the dunes anymore. Could you imagine how brave the guy is who drove that over that cliff? That's crazy. And this is a prototype. They actually did the scientific evaluation of the duck here on Cape Cod. It doesn't have a bow plane to go into waves. I'll show you what I'm talking about. That one right there, if it hit a steep wave, would submarine, or if you came on a steep embankment, go in the water and submerge. So they came up with a solution for that. This is a prototype. When this prototype was being tested, the generals weren't impressed by it very much. Well, a Coast Guard boat had lost power and got run up on a sandbar. But there was water in between the Coast Guard boat and sand, and so a boat couldn't reach it. So they were doing the demonstration for the generals. There was 60-mile-an-hour winds, by the way. They went out and they plucked the 7 crewmen off that ship, that boat, before it got tore apart. And the general said, you know what, that's pretty good, because it went over the sandbar, into the water, over the sandbar, got to the boat, over the sandbar, into the water, and right back out. So Cape Cod had a huge impact in the development of the duck boat. This is Katuitt. This is a real color, it's not colorized, this is a real color photo of one in Katuitt Bay. These were top secret, you couldn't talk about them, mention them, or anything like that when they're driving around the Cape. There's the bow plane I'm talking about. See how that metal flap goes up? So if this hit a deep wave, it would ride up. Okay? And you can see how it broke away right in this picture. This picture was taken off of the shores of Washburn Island in Vineyard Sound. You can see the patches they have on their sleeves, sewn by the women of Falmouth. Here they leave in South Cape Beach, Mashpee. 36 duck boats were shipped by rail to Camp Edwards a day. This is a landing vehicle track. This was hugely important for the Marines hitting the coral beaches in the Pacific, because they'd have a coral beach that would rip apart a regular landing craft, and then you have the lagoon. So this could crawl over the reef swim through the lagoon, and have the guys hit the beach. However, it's propelled by its tracks that have paddles, metal paddles. The residents of Osterville and Katuitt complain that they silted over the oyster beds because they churned up so much mud. Not every vehicle, well, this is the Weasel, M29 Weasel, and this could go through anything. I think that's environmentally insensitive to run them through a marsh like that now, but mud, nothing would stop this little thing. Not every vehicle was a success. This is the Aqua Cheetah. Has anybody heard of the Aqua Cheetah? No. It was a terrible design. I think it could carry 10 men. It was based on the 3/4 truck. It had low freeboard and was very, very unseaworthy. 2 engineer amphibians out of Katuitt drowned before they canceled the production of it. The biggest invention was also the smallest. The seasick pill was developed at Camp Edwards. And without it, we wouldn't be able to do what we did. They did a demonstration for the generals. They had the LCVPs go through some rough surf and do a surprise landing for them on the shore. Well, the coxswains made it. When they opened the doors, the guys went out and fell on the beach puking. They were completely combat ineffective. If you've ever really been seasick, you might want to be shot at that point. So the seasick pill helped guys be able to function, on the ride in to shore. The engineer amphibians had to do their intense training. They are treading water with 60 pounds of equipment and a helmet. And he's not doing very well right here. Okay. They were in incredible shape. They marched 26 miles with a pack in a day. They, again, had their life-saving water, drowning prevention and all that. This is a July 6th demonstration they did for the press corps. You see how dark the uniforms look? That's because they had jumped from a boat with their packs, rifle, and swam into shore and hit the beach ready to go. Yeah, they are doing an obstacle course, asparagus course. They were training demolitions. They had to blow obstacles because the enemy would have obstacles on the beach, clear mines, clear paths with the heavy equipment. They do evacuation. You can see the blue crescent on his helmet. He's an engineer, amphibian. This is Normandy. Again, the first engineer. These are the guys who were right here, pulling a paratrooper who was wounded out. They did bayonet practice. They'd climb they had a 48-foot high cargo net stand on the base. If you notice, the guy on the second on the right, first on the right, he's not holding the rope the right way. If you ever have to use a cargo net to evacuate, if you put your hand on the cross rope, somebody's going to step on it. So you're supposed to have your hands on the vertical ropes and your feet go on the horizontal ropes. It ended with a 100-yard mud crawl, which had explosives going off, and you see that little wire? That is where the live rounds were going over these guys' heads. They had 30 caliber machine guns shooting at 30 inches as you crawled underneath it. One of the engineers in his memoir said that was the scariest thing he ever did, was the obstacle course. And the literature on the obstacle course bragged that no one had been killed using it, which means somebody was shot using it. They had a common enemy, poison ivy. A lot of guys from other parts of the country had no idea what poison ivy was, So they'd land on Dead Neck over in Katuitt and then crawl through the poison ivy, and then there'd be a mess. To entertain themselves, they would be crap games everywhere, poker games. They had slot machines at the officers' quarters in Katuitt. They had a USO in Katuitt. There was a USO in Falmouth. There was a Negro USO in Mashpee, because we had Negro troops. That's the word they used at the time. Don't sue me. That's the way. I didn't make it up. The first division to come in and do amphibious training was this division. Anybody know what this division is? It's the 45th Infantry Division. This was their symbol up to 1939, because the swastika is an Indian symbol for good luck. Okay? It's on a diamond because it represents the 4 states, if I can remember: Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, and one more. Oklahoma. Okay. So they changed it to the Thunderbird, which went over a little better. Although I think it would have been interesting if the Nazis saw guys wearing swastikas coming at them. Might have given you a second where they might hesitate, you know? The 45th was a National Guard unit from Oklahoma and those other states. There was a shortage of boats, so a lot of training was conducted with mock wooden boats set up on the dry land. The division was split between Fort Devens and Camp Edwards. The entire 45th Division was rotated through the Cape for their amphibious training. There were a lot of American Indians in the 45th. The Cape Codders were fascinated by these warriors from the West. And the warriors from the West liked Cape Cod because in their home states, they couldn't drink at a bar. Saloons were, Indians were prohibited from saloons. At Fort Devens, the Indians put on a display of native dancing. And this was seen by military radio personality D.V. Edwards, Devens Edwards, so she was D.V. Edwards. And she had a morning radio show that would play when the soldiers were getting up. And she asked the Indians if they would come and talk about the dance display that she had just seen. Well, the radio station wasn't on Fort Devens, so they had to get up like 2 in the morning to drive out to get there by 5 in the morning. They didn't have highways back then, you can remember that too. And all the Indians said no, except for one guy who was large, had a scar on his face, and he said he'd go. So he gets there, and she tries to do her interview with him. What should we call you? Call me soldier. Where do you come from? Far away. And she tries a few more questions with the same monosyllabic answers. Finally she goes, what does Native American dancing mean to you? Well, much like Shakespeare's English language, Native American dancing is to the native culture. He was the most educated guy in the unit, and he played her on the radio. This is the most famous member of the 45th Division. He wasn't armed with a rifle, he was armed with a pen. Anybody know? Maybe you recognize his work. Willie and Joe. And if you notice, Joe's hands are on the rope the right way because he went through amphibious training. And the caption that went with this was, hey Joe, when you hit the water, swish your feet around. They could really use it. That's, of course, his most famous cartoon. He actually was selling cartoons to the Herald when he was out at Camp Edwards in Fort Devens. One of his first paid jobs was a cartooning for the Boston Herald. The training of the 45th ended with a big invasion of Martha's Vineyard. Boats would leave Cape and land on the shores The invasion was even to have paratroopers capture the airport. The 508th Infantry Parachute Regiment was here a couple of days before the invasion. They have to go through hellish training. Anybody who's gone through airborne school knows what I'm talking about. In order to earn the jump wings, you have to survive 5 practice jumps. And once you get your wings, you can blouse your pants. You can put your pants into your boots and your jump boots. Herein lies the problem. The amphibious engineers wore waterproof jump boots, and they went through their own hellish training, and they like to blouse their boots as well. So, prior to the invasion of Martha's Vineyard, a large group of paratroopers were walking down Main Street, Buzzards Bay, and they encountered a large group of amphibious engineers walking up Main Street, Buzzards Bay. And the paratroopers decided that the amphibious engineers didn't have the right to wear jump boots. And they tried to take them off of the amphibious engineers. The amphibious engineers demurred, and there was quite a scuffle. The police blocked off both ends of the road, and they called for the MPs to come out to Main Street, Buzzards Bay. So the first battle the paratroopers and the engineers were in was over boots in Buzzards Bay. 6 MPs were injured breaking it up.
Those boots were the most comfortable boots I ever wore.
Yeah. The invasion was so top secret, vineyarders were out with signs welcoming the invaders. The 75th Composite Infantry Training Battalion acted as enemy troops for the invasion. There were charges going off, smoke screens, gunfire, aircraft swooping in, mocks, strafing raids, smoke screens, some planes doing smoke screens. One wave of boats did get lost in the gloom, and several units ended up landing on the wrong beach, but the invasion was ruled a success. The amphibians had captured the airport by the time the 508th was scheduled to drop. So they came down, and that might have been payback for the boot thing. So they came down for nothing. Yeah, we got it. Yeah, thanks. You can throw the sandwich. The 82nd Airborne jumped in the invasion of North Africa, Sicily, and Normandy. There's another connection to the invasion of Normandy. A top secret underground gasoline pipe was laid from Mash to the island to Martha's Vineyard, testing the feasibility of efficient transport of fuel to France. And this was actually done. It's called Operation Pluto. They had a floating gas line running from England to an island off of France, because one of the biggest things that the Army used was gasoline. So they could pump it directly across the channel. And it was here, right here in Cape Cod. The 45th was shipped overseas and soon used their training, landing in Sicily and then southern France. The next division to arrive for amphibious training was the 36th Texas Division. Oh, who can sing? Anybody sing? All right, you're going to help us. Do you know the tune of "I've Been Working on the Railroad"? Everybody know that tune? All right, we're going to. All right. The Cape Cod and these tough hombres from Texas hit it off, even though the Texans complained about the lack of spice in the New England diet. The Texans liked to fight so much that the record, "The Eyes of Texas Are Upon You," had to be pulled from all the local jukeboxes. The Texans would play the song and then insist that everybody in uniform stand at attention. If the request was refused, the refuser was forced to stand, or a fight would break out. So in honor of these brave Texans, if you could stand, if you're able, and we will sing "The Eyes of Texas Are Upon You" to the tune of "I've Been Working on the Railroad." Stand if you're able. You ready? The eyes of Texas are upon you all the livelong day. The eyes of Texas are upon you, you cannot get away. Do nor think you can escape them. From night early in the morn, the eyes of Texas are upon you, till Gabriel blows his horn. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. They also took out Rangers. Ranger battalions were trained here in amphibious operations. And anybody know the history of Normandy? The Rangers hit a very difficult military target called Pointe du Hoc. Well, guess where they learned to practice climbing cliffs? Gay Head. They practiced on Gay Head before they hit the Pointe du Hoc in Normandy. Isn't that amazing? This is a picture of the Rangers up on Pointe du Hoc, which unfortunately their communication, they weren't able to tell the ships and their other foreign battalions that they had captured Pointe du Hoc. And so a U.S. aircraft saw movement on the top of Pointe du Hoc, and nobody told him that they were Americans, and he was prepared to strafe them when somebody laid an American flag on the ground, because holding a flag on a pole, you can't see that from the air. And the plane waggled its wings and took off. There were 200 of them, and they were up there for like 2 days. They had to use German weapons because they were out of their own ammunition and all that, and before they were relieved from other sources. But they were cables running from an observation point right on the end of the point, which they couldn't take for 3 days. But they cut the wires so they couldn't communicate with the artillery inside, and they saved tons of lives by cutting those wires. And where did they learn amphibious tactics? Right here in Cape Cod. On September 10th, the 2nd and 3rd ESBs conducted a parade. 1,000 boats paraded around the Cape and went through the Cape Cod Canal. The co-founder of the Cape Cod military, Jerry Ellis, was a child when this happened. He said the noise from 1,000 diesel engines and the fumes was absolutely incredible. A 3-day second invasion of Martha's Vineyard by the 2nd, ES, and 3rd ESB and the 36th Infantry Division was huge. They were going to be a full division. They invaded Nantucket too on this one. Attached used tanks and the new M10 tank destroyer. Boats left from Katuitt Bay, Wacoit Bay, Dennis, and larger landing craft left from New Bedford. The LSTs left from New Bedford to hit the beaches on Cape Cod. A group of generals and admirals were waiting in the cold pre-dawn dark to observe the training exercise. Near the appointed time, a lone lost boat pulls up and a coxswain yells up, "Is this Red Beach?" And the generals and admirals smirk to each other, thinking, "Oh, here's another training screw-up." Suddenly out of the gloom comes a wave of landing craft in perfect formation. The wind was blowing out and it muffled the roar of the engines. The lost boat was actually from the opposition forces sent to set off charges for realism. There's a color photograph of the invasion. They're putting down Marston's matting to help vehicles get over the soft sand. Here's in the picture of them hitting the Martha's Vineyard. The exercise was so good it was called off a day early. Before leaving for the European Theater of Operations, the 36 had 2 lieutenants killed in the Coconut Grove fire in Boston. They went off to land in Salerno, Anzio, and fight in southern France. Yeah, they hit in southern France. The 2nd ESB and most of the boats went by rail to Florida and Camp Johnson. 38 landing craft, however, sailed the 2,170 miles to Caravella, Florida. Much like today's snowbirds, the amphibians returned in the spring, mostly by rail, but again, another group sailed the entire way in LCMs. The Cape Cod Commandos were wanted by MacArthur in the Pacific Theater of Operations. The problem was that all the deck space on ships heading to the Pacific were reserved for airplanes. The planes were vital for stopping the Japanese advances. You see those things stick up in the air? Those are P-38 planes, and there's other planes on all over the ship. The landing craft were too large to fit in the hatches of the ships. So General Heavey of the Amphibious Command had the idea of shipping landing craft in pieces inside the hull of the ships and then assembling the bolts in Australia. So the time that our amphibious engineers spent in the factories now paid off, because those guys all knew how to assemble the boats when they got to Australia. By the time the amphibious engineers, ESB, had landed on the Philippines, it was their 75th combat landing. They dropped dug off. And you can see everyone sort of worried and how pissed off MacArthur looks, because he wanted a dry shoe landing. And the coxswain in the boat said, "Don't get your rank accused of my authority. This is as far as this boat's going." However, MacArthur saw how dramatic it looked of him wading to shore. Every other island he landed on for the first time, he made sure he was in the water to get a drama shot coming out of the surf to claim the island. The second ESP received the President Unit Citation Award. When the amphibians left in September 43, that was it for the amphibious training on the Cape. The Hurricane 44 caused extensive damage to the Cape. Many trees were knocked down. Well, they took some of the 5,000 German POWs that of Rommels Africa Corps that were housed on the Cape, in Camp Edwards and in tents in Mashpee, by the way. We used to clear the timber. They were paid for their work, and the Cape Cod residents were paid for the lumber. They had 6 sawmills operated by the POWs on Camp Edwards. They cleared 7 million board feet of lumber after that hurricane. The same enemy employees were used to tear down Camp Canduit and return it to its pre-war conditions. Funny story, in '93, 50 years later, a group of Cape Cod commandos were walking around Katuitt taking pictures of where their barracks and everything used to be. And one of the mansion homeowners ran out, "You can't take pictures of my property, blah, blah, blah." What are you, for a real estate company? They're like, no, lady, we were here back in the war." "Oh, you're the ones who left all those barrels and cans in my car." It wasn't even them, it was the Nazis who dug it and didn't take it away, you know? So, yeah. Washburn still had a job to do. It was known by the island, had one more duty for him. The Camp Edwards had the largest convalescent hospital in America, 5,000 beds. The reason you don't know about it, it wasn't one big building. They just had barracks after barrack after barrack after barrack. In fact, they built little causeways, covered causeways, so they could wheel a patient between buildings, because if you land on a stretcher, if it's raining, you're getting hit in the face with snow or whatever, or sunning. So they had little causeways running between the buildings, but they had 5,000 beds, and they had converted some of the barracks into these. Did anybody know what these things sticking out of the building are? Ventilation. Emergency slides. You get guys without legs who can't move, you can't carry them down the stairs one at a time. You fire them down the slides. Hope somebody catches them at the bottom. Yeah. And they used Washburn Island as a rehab, because these guys had to learn how to swim with one arm or one leg and all that stuff, and they'd feel self-conscious on a regular beach. Well, the beach was nothing but wounded GIs. So that's what Washburn final job was helping rehab injured soldiers. And that concludes my lecture. Any questions, comments? Oh, that's very much. Yes, sir.
Did they ever use Noshan for any of that training? Looks like it would be a great place for it.
They probably hit everything when they're out there. You know, I don't, it's not come up by name, but I'm sure.
Because I guess it's privately owned, the whole thing. I'm not sure if that would have mattered.
I don't think it mattered to them.
Take it if they needed it, right?
Yeah, they'd land and get, run around, get off, they had Navy was using, all the Vineyard airports. Otis Field became Quonset Point Naval Auxiliary Air Station, Otis. That's how they worded things back then. So was Hyannis, was a Quonset Point Naval Auxiliary Air Station, Hyannis. George Bush, the first, had his only operational crash. He was flying a Avenger, the big torpedo bomber. He came in too close to the plane in front of him, and that caused turbulence. So on his landing, he tipped the wing and slid off the runway. He totaled the plane. Nobody was hurt, but that happened in Hyannis. I think it was 1 month ago, 75 years ago. Yeah. So they were over 150,000 naval personnel because they took all the barracks over at Otis and Camp Edwards as to train naval. The whole carrier groups training. They built the aircraft carrier, by the way, in the Fall River shipyard, sailed it down to Cape Cod Bay, and the first carrier landing the guys did was in Cape Cod Bay. They painted an aircraft carrier on the cement field at Otis to practice landing on. They even had to put a steam catapult in eventually. So there was naval history here too, which is a whole nother story. But yeah, no, there's so many. There was a submarine repair base in Provincetown. Anybody know that? I didn't know that until I started this. The German Africa Corps were on the base, but naval German prisoners of war were at the Chatham Naval Air Station, and they did the laundry. And by the way, you could rent out Nazis. They picked strawberries, picked cranberries, painted houses. You'd go in, you'd get a German sergeant, and they just follow orders.
There was a commercial laundry on King Street for years, and during World War II, because all the men were in the service, and this was like heavy bags of laundry and a lot of heavy lifting. Apparently, the guy that owned the laundromat made a deal with Camp Edwards, and they would bus 10 German POWs to King Street every day.
Yep.
And the guys would work in the laundry and bus back to the prison at night.
Well, like I said, Jerry Ellis was a young boy during World War II, and his dad used to get German POWs to work for him. And he'd challenge them to basketball, which they never played. And he'd kill them. And then he made them play soccer, which they played, and he just had a chance, all these 6-foot-tall blonde, Aryan Supermen, he just had a chance.
They were glad to be here. It wasn't the Russian.
A lot of them came back after, they had to send them back to Germany, but a lot of them did come back and settle here because they enjoyed it so much, yeah. Yes? Any other questions? No? Yeah? Well, thank you very much.